I'm Julie Zolman, and I study how ordinary people interact with finance and technology, mostly in Africa, with a particular focus on Kenya. My recent work has been on technology that manages labor and what that means for urban workers. So I've been looking at things like Uber, but also e-commerce and other kinds of labor mediating platforms. I have just a few thoughts that I wanted to share today. First is that digital technologies can have very different impacts depending on the type of technology, but also the social reality where they insert themselves. So in Kenya, we have this very famous mobile money system, M-Pesa. And M-Pesa is actually used in Kenya as a redistributive technology. So those with more means primarily use it to send money to those in their social networks with relatively less means. We also see it used for people helping one another so that they lend and borrow with one another, help each other out of difficult situations, and pay on behalf of others for important expenses. The labor platforms that I study in Kenya work very differently. So early on in the market, they tended to benefit the early entrants. So if you think of a case like Uber, the first drivers who came into Uber were doing really well at the beginning because they were able to solve a problem of not being able to find enough clients. So technology solved that problem at first. But at equilibrium, it became a race to the bottom. So we live in a context that's very opportunity starved. And when markets drive prices down, that's really good for consumers, but bad for workers. And we have a lot of workers, about 86% of workers in Kenya, who don't have any kind of formal job. So none of them can afford to use Uber as riders, but they're all fighting at the chance to have a good livelihood on the platform. So when you're selling to the rich in a very poor country, and all of the drivers are fighting for a little bit of scraps of work, this really exacerbates inequality. It also means that the biggest gains are captured by the players in digital markets with the most capital and the greatest access to data, who can get the lowest prices by buying in bulk and to reach a new huge digital market. So we see in digital marketplaces a lot more concentration, and that's true for things like Amazon as much as it's true for things like Uber. Even small amounts of capital in capital-starved places like Kenya matter. So we see, for example, in Uber, about half of the drivers in ride-hailing in Kenya don't own their own cars. They rent a car weekly at a weekly fixed rate from a partner. And that partner was the person who had enough access to capital to be able to buy a car. And so that partner is actually capturing a large share of the value. In Africa, this kind of introduction of heightened competition coincides with another problem, which is that there is pretty much no productivity growth in other sectors. So people are being pitted against each other in a very competitive marketplace where wages are actually being depressed, where there's no other exit strategy to alternative sectors where employment is actually being created. And we know that this is a big structural economic problem because poverty reduction in other countries has always been driven from structural transformation that happened through productivity gains that benefited the masses, so typically in agriculture. And that drove change in productivity in other sectors. Digital economies do not do this. They tend towards agglomeration. But technology layers on top of other phenomena as well. So we see, as I said, in other African countries as well as Kenya, we see very, very slow job growth, and in some places even the loss of massive numbers of jobs. So South Africa, for example, has had historically a very large mining sector that employed a lot of people. But that's changing as some sort of materials dry up and technology takes the place of those workers. So there's some really interesting academics thinking in this space. One of my favorites is James Ferguson, who's an anthropologist. And he argues that we need to plan for this with social change. When we have an era of lower demand for workers, we need to be thinking very seriously about universal basic income, for example, and to think about it as administering shares in the economy to all the citizens for their contributions to an economy that runs with fewer workers. And technology could be the means for that distribution, but whether that distribution happens is a social question, not a technology question. And that brings me to my next point, which is that markets are social institutions. They are governed by rules, laws, and norms that societies set. And those norms need to be updated for the digital era if we're to have any hope of kind of an inclusive digital revolution. Thank you.